Coffee Pods, a podcast of the Acorn Christian Healing Foundation, exploring what's happening in the world through the lens of Christian healing.
Coffee Pods. I've asked my son to come back because we're talking today about absurdity and technology, and I thought, I want his perspective again, and here we are. Welcome back.
Thank you. Can I ask you a question to start off? This is going to be a life-changing question. How are you?
How am I?
Yeah.
Another day in paradise. I had a fantastic walk in Richmond Park recently, and I was so excited. They're filming Ted Lasso, the new season.
Oh, awesome.
Everybody thought Ted Lasso was gone for good, and they're back over there filming a new season, so it's kind of exciting. And Richmond Park is just outside of Richmond, and so there's buzz in the air, and I got to go see lots of deer, so that's always nice. And we found a new pub with magnificent fish and chips, which that's where I went for my birthday. I had this massive piece of Atlantic cod. Does that make you jealous?
No, it makes me so jealous. But here I found out that there's a local delicacy, if you want to call it that. And Franche-Comté, the region southwest of where I am, they're known for their fish and chips. But it's poisson.
Well, you got to tell the listeners where you are, because they'll think you're in America or something.
Yeah, they will. I'm in the northeastern corner of France in a region called Alsace, near where Strasbourg is. So right at the top right corner of France on a map. Yeah, it is really beautiful.
Isn't it funny? Your grandfather actually did postgraduate work all around that area probably 50, 60 years ago, and now you're there. So small world. We're talking about cycles today and how things are cyclical. So, it's funny. You're back there, and I've got a keychain in my pocket with Alsace on it from my father. So it's the world is one big circle that goes around and around.
Yeah, where the roads have been laid, we often travel along.
Well, you proposed a question for me, and it got me thinking. And I said, "Why don't we?"
I was trying to see what you would say. I was trying to provoke an interesting answer.
Well, it was like a riddle. It was a chicken and the egg riddle. You said, "Are we absurd because the world is broken, or is the world broken because we've all embraced absurdity?" And I thought, God, that's a real interesting question to think about. Are we absurd because the world's broken, or is the world broken because all us human beings are absurd? And I often bump into people in ministry, and they'll look at me and they'll say, "Has it always been this crazy? The world seems to has lost its mind." And
do you feel absurd?
So I thought, well, yeah, I think so, but let's talk about it.
I don't know about you, but some days I wake up and I don't know if it's me or the world or both, but there is a level of absurdity there. I turn on my phone, I walk out the door, and it just feels like there's this constant surge of absurdity. It just seems like some people, some events even are fueled by this absurdity, and I don't really know how to articulate that.
I know, and I guess sometimes I feel like I've gotten this critical spirit. It's sort of the later middle-aged man syndrome, where you sit around and criticize everything that you see, and and so it's like stupid things. Like
don't be too hard on yourself.
But it's like I watch an NFL playoff game from America, and I'm here in England, and I'm imagining all these English people watching the Pittsburgh Steelers lose, our beloved team who lost this week, but watching people come onto the playing field, onto the pitch, and all of these adult grown men skipping onto the field like a bunch of kindergartners. And I think, what's happening?
Man, look.
It's crazy. It's absurd.
It's
It's like a bunch of kindergartners going out to playtime, and every high school, every university football team, they skip across the field.
Here's a question. No. I'm going to stop you there. Have you tried it?
It's true.
You might find it fun. The absurdity you might adopt.
I'm too fat and old to.
You might find it fun. The absurdity you might adopt.
I'm too fat and old to skip anymore, I think.
Yeah, if you skipped, that's the end of it, man.
But I'm saying you'll never watch a game the same way if you think about it. These grown men are skipping across the field. That's absurd.
Well,
we were at a play we went to see a musical. I took your sisters to see Matilda. at the
Yeah.
Cambridge, and it's fantastic. But some people think that because you spend a lot of money on a ticket to the theater, that you have to give a standing ovation. So if you go to
Right.
Broadway, and there's
Right.
like this social pressure to give a standing ovation, and I know some people will think it's so absurd that there's an expectation that you stand. That
Well,
it's kind of absurd to think that because you're there and because it's Broadway, you're supposed to stand. No matter what, you're supposed to stand, give a
having
standing
spent time with
ovation.
theater people, it goes the other way as well. Some people try not to stand because only the best performances get standing ovations. So where do we find ourselves? Do we try to be in the middle of those two poles, or do we
Yeah,
lean in the more
yeah.
generous direction? I don't know.
But and I guess I am showing my age. When I was younger, I thought going out to the club, to the disco, going dancing, that we'd have dances at university, and it was a big deal. But
So you did
now,
dance. I bet you some of your dances were skipping.
I think about the absurdity of clubbing, and I go through Kingston sometimes late, and it's a university town here, and I think about university towns around the world and young people going clubbing, and I thought to myself, how absurd, really, if you stop and think about what clubbing is, that you basically go to a dark, stinky cave with a sticky floor
Yeah.
to deafen yourself and pay $14 for carbonated sugar and ethanol. And then
I
you
don't know
go
what you're
home and you
talking about.
say, man, I had such a good time. I was like, that doesn't sound good. That sounds absurd. To think that, it's like, how did we get there? How did we
Yeah,
get to this place?
but I mean, we could start pointing out the micro absurdities in every part of our life. But if we do
It's
so, we
true.
become ultra critics. We just can't
Yeah.
function if we do that. So where do we
Yeah.
draw
I
a line?
mean, hey, 4th of July in America, what do? We
Yeah.
give children fire on sticks and say, run around in the backyard with a little piece of wire and
Yeah.
don't burn the trees down.
Yeah.
Or you shoot explosive charges in your back garden. And
Sparklers
is
are
that not
fun.
absurd? That's absurd.
It's absurd.
Or another absurdity, I mean, COVID sort of brought this to light, but the idea that we put all these candles on birthday cakes and we have children blow them out, and then we hand people a piece of cake with spit on it. That's the most absurd thing that culturally
Yeah.
that's normal, but it's still kind of disgusting to think
Yeah.
that you let a kid spit on your cake and then you hand your friend a piece. But that's where we are, and it is kind of absurd. So I really have become a moany old git, haven't I?
No. I mean, there's lots of there's big absurdities on social media, like us following people we've never met, we don't really know,
Yeah.
and we just know their online personas. I mean, one of the most infamous one's Elon Musk, a billionaire, the richest man in the world, and he's created this persona that so many people follow, but it's not really him. So we live in a world of fake persona that
we
people
create
aspire to.
characters, just characters of who we want to be rather than who we are. But I guess the most this one hurts because this absurdity is kind of my own, and that is the idea that we go out to a shop, and I won't name them. There's a ton of different varieties, but that we would spend $10 on a small cup of hot water with crushed beans that have been soaked in that hot water. And we pay lots of money for a cup of coffee.
No, $9.95.
That's absurd.
We pay $9.95 plus tax. Thank you very much.
Dear, well then that makes it less absurd, I guess. But and I was watching TikTok the other day, and that there was like a whole channel devoted to this thing called ASMR, which I'm sure you know all about. ASMR. I'm new to this thing. It's people listening to whispers and strange noises,
hey.
like it's like scratching your microphone.
Don't hate on this.
It's like all the rage, though. It's absurd. But then it caught me, and I thought, this is absurd. Why am I enjoying watching someone cut something with a knife and listening to the sound it makes?
Yeah, I mean, the way we talk, vocal fry is literally a cultural marker. It marks you what social group you fit into and where
or
you
listening
are.
to the commentators on the BBC when they talk about the news today.
Yeah,
Everything
right.
is going to be punched when
And
we talk. And I
don't
go,
forget
what's
about
going
the
on?
background. Yeah, don't
So,
forget about the
okay,
background music as well.
so clearly I feel completely surrounded by absurdity. And this is a podcast
Yeah.
about healing. So clearly I need some healing when it comes to coping with the absurdities in the world. Where do we go from here? I mean, I guess we
I
start out by looking
Yeah,
at what is cultural absurdity kind of from a academic point of view. Can
sure.
you tell me, give me 2 examples of cultural absurdity?
A question that popped up in my mind when you're saying that is, how do we heal in a world that's hurting us actively? Probably. I mean, maybe not. Maybe you live in a bubble, but for most people, they're actively struggling in some way or another. So, for example, there's this idea of a performative outrage cycle. So news cycles do this all the time. There's a 24-hour news cycle,
Yeah.
and the goal is to get you to engage with it.
So performative outrage. Tell me more.
So what
Okay.
people have learned, especially people that make money on social media, is the more outrageous, the more edgy, the more out there what they post is, the more engagement they'll get. It's not
Okay.
healthy engagement, but it's engagement. And
So the
what's the
algorithm rewards the anger of the post. So
Sure.
what you're describing is a kind of society that on the surface looks kind of passionate and morally engaged, but in actual fact is completely relationally disconnected.
and
People are
dishonest?
like numb. They're just fed
Yeah.
up. So that makes it absurd, I guess, because the louder your, I guess you're calling it moral signaling, the louder that becomes, the actual transformation happens. So it's a real
Right.
weird kind of thing that happens. Give me another example. I know there's all sorts of directions we could go with this conversation.
Yeah. Yeah, it's hard. And for me, I'm oriented to kind of digital media world, so I
Well,
immediately
then
start to
go in that direction then.
we're in a really bad state in our world, and social media is not helping that state. Social media is creating radical individualism and also creating this dependency, this dopamine cycle of constant validation. So you go on
Okay.
social media and you do your thing, but you want something out of it. We're consumers. We're trapped in our own cycle of consumption, essentially.
Mm.
And I think many people, without realizing it, are, yeah, I'll say it, totally dependent on their social media apps on their phone or tablet, whatever they use.
But culture tells them to stay independent, and yet they're dependent on wanting the likes and the desperate for followers and affirmation and comments on their social media feeds.
When you're dependent on something or someone to be independent, you are not independent. It is a facade you have built in your own head.
Okay.
If you go to an influencer, if you go to a group on Facebook to feel independent, in actuality, you are the exact opposite. You are depending on something or someone or some
So your
idea.
identity almost becomes a public performance,
Right.
that you're just constantly looking for some kind of external validation. So you're saying people are independent, and yet they're completely fragile because, I mean, how many people have emailed me saying how upset they are because somebody made a nasty comment on their TikTok video, or they get really mad because someone dares to comment on a political post with a
Yeah.
contrary position.
What do you think? Why is dependency cycles, outrage media constantly being churned? Why is that absurd? Because the world before social media was pretty crazy. We had wars, we had famine, we had starvation. And that's pretty absurd too.
The weird thing is, and I made a note of this, it's like the world sort of preaches to us that being autonomous is super important, while at the same time creating perhaps a dependence that's greater ever than in all of history, because of the interconnectedness of everybody with the computer, with our emails, with AI knowing who everybody is and where you're going and tracking motion, so that you've got a message which is completely contrary to reality. And that to me seems absurd, and so I thought, when I made a note today, I said, what if absurdity and the brokenness of the world was something that we envisioned as a circle instead of a line? Because so many people look at things
Right.
like boy, girl, male, female, gay, straight. They think of linear, binary kind of measuring ways of looking at it. And I thought, well, what if instead of seeing this as a line between the absurd and the world, and that we seek to be more grounded in the world, what if we saw this as a cycle, that it goes around and around? And the idea is that rather than being consumed by which came first, the chicken or the egg, we figure, how can we make the cycle healthier, knowing that the cycle is ongoing, that there's
Yep.
always an absurdity and a culture, and an absurdity and a culture, and how can we shape so that it's a healthier shape? I pulled a quote from the great G.K. Chesterton, who writes beautifully, and one of his quotes was, "The world is not lacking in wonders, but only in a sense of wonder." You see, Chesterton often argued that cultural absurdity rises when people lose the ability to see reality. So when we lose a sense of wonder, when we lose the ability to go to somewhere like Richmond Park and see a deer and experience trees and actually kind of enjoy the breeze, then the world suddenly will feel chaotic and trivial and distorted. But when we rediscover wonder, it seems like that puts things right in a way. And
Mm.
I don't know. I mean, I wonder whether the world is so completely shaped by the media and by what we see on television and in our phones every day, that we're in a battle to try and rediscover groundedness and be healed from the absurdity.
I'm gathering damaged people damage people. That's the cycle. Damaged world damages people.
Yes.
But how do we break this cycle? What's the, because when we think of battle, you just use the idea of battle. It's really easy to jump the gun, I think, and go, well, it's external. I need to fight the enemy force. There's evil, something. You put a label on it, you fight that. But it sounds
Yeah.
like part of this, if not most of this, starts from within. Is that what I'm hearing?
I think, yeah. I mean, I think that when you think about just a general sickness or the general problem of absurdity, I think that when meaning collapses, then behavior is going to follow. People will start acting foolish and even being criminal, because when you don't have any hope, nothing really matters anymore. And then suddenly there's things like, I guess you could call it moral confusion, because people start having what sound like irrational conversations about conflict and justice and the use of force, and police officers being justified in shooting people, and politics, and
Yeah.
suddenly right becomes wrong and black becomes white, and the world seems rather cynical. And then we run away to theaters and the West End and the movie houses because we want to escape. You need to have a break from the chaos.
But when you go to the West End recently, and more in the case of the cinema, the world is reflected in our art as the art is reflected in our world, and that absurdity is leaking through. As time goes on, if you
Yeah.
look at the films being produced, they have this level of absurdity, of sometimes evil. There's grit in them.
Yeah,
So you leave the world and you enter into it in a different way.
Imagine going to see Matilda and you walk out of the theater with Miss Trunchbull abusing children in the chokey, and she runs the school, and Miss Honey got fired. And you
Right.
go, that's absurd. The reason you
listen,
resonate with these shows is
that's more
because
like
good
reality.
prevails.
No, exactly. But what is real in our world, if we're being honest, but if Miss Trunchbull kept going and got rid of anyone in her way, that would feel more real. And I think that's why that story feels so good, is because it defies what we expect.
Sure. Or Oliver. Oliver at the Gielgud right now is so popular. And at the end, you basically have Fagin and Dodger walking off into the sunset And you wonder, are they going to continue to steal just in another place? You know, the whole idea of reforming one's character and doing the right thing. And little Oliver, you know, is reunited with his birth family, and he's going to be rich now because he's got a rich grandfather who cares about him. It's the dream. I think we come into connection with art and we watch movies and we see ourselves in the story. It was like the post I made on Facebook the other day where your sister did a picture of me in the Richmond Green where they filmed Ted Lasso, and we posed a picture, and she put me in each of the character spots in the photograph. And I found myself thinking one of the characters is actually a pretty dark character in the show, and he's rich and conniving. The other one is Ted, who is kind of the heart of the story and a genuinely nice guy, but has broken family situation. And then you've got Ted's sidekick, who's very intelligent but very weird, kind of nerdy and wonderful. And then I found myself going, there's a bit of me in each one of the characters, which is why seeing the picture resonated. And then I thought, maybe when I watch these programs and I see the absurd things, I enter into the absurdity, because then it helps me to reground myself outside of it.
You have to be careful, I think, because then entertainment can replace empathy in a sense. Instead of going out in the world and seeing yourself in others, you know, seeing Christ in everyone else, you just do that behind closed doors, and then when you leave your house, no one else matters. But I want to see Ted Lasso. That sounds like a good show.
So let's talk about the cycle then. We talked about this circle, this idea that I had, and I guess you could call it a feedback loop.
The
cycle between brokenness and absurdity. And so, as you said, trauma produces absurdity. Absurdity can produce more trauma. So you've got online culture amplifying people's own insecurity, telling you what's pretty and what's ugly and what's right and wrong. And political stuff, the polarization, which feeds cultural confusion. So, you know, what part of this cycle do you feel most caught in when you think about what we're talking about today? And again, we should talk about our own faith, because our walk with God surely should be a part of this conversation and kind of where we go with it.
It's funny you say that, because immediately I wanted to talk about Jesus, but I'll answer me and then I'll lead into what my gut was telling me to talk about. I think my struggle is that there's a pull on these imaginary made-up, man-made poles. They don't actually exist, but we like to think they do because it's easier for our brains, to the left or to the right. And when I break down what I believe, and if I wrote down on a piece of paper what I believe, I might line up more on one side than the other, though I think they're made up and none of that really matters. Left, right, up, down. But I think what really does matter, and what my gut jumped at when you were talking just then to talk about, is that I am grounded and centered in my faith in Jesus.
I want you to respond to this. The great St. Augustine once said, God is always trying to give us good things, but our hands are too full to receive them. Tell me what that means to you.
I think that we can, not that we have, but we can pick up the wrong sort of substance in our daily life. We can consume distracting, unhealthy things that make us quite literally deteriorate as people. And so what are the things, or what is the thing that sustains us, that keeps us going, that points us in the right direction? So I think it's not that it's not like we're fallen, that we have this baggage by default when we enter Earth. It's that we choose to do things that actively damage us.
But I mean, I guess when I think about that quote, I think about this little thing right here that I'm holding.
Oh, yeah.
And I think this is in my hand, and it's often in both my hands. And it distracts me, it consumes me. And I think, is St. Augustine telling me, you know, God actually wants to put other things in your hands, but your hands are full of distractions and time-consuming, time-wasting, argumentative political debates and drama. And I think, what can I put down so that God might replace those things with something that's better for me? more walks in Richmond Park, more opportunities to see flowers and birds and love my neighbor. And that to me, what we've been talking about is healing. And that to me is how you break the cycle.
But what
I
if
think
you're so used to reaching out to grab something that would really help you and getting bit or getting scratched when you do so? Because I think people have this internal spiritual problem of reaching for what I think is a genuinely good thing and getting hurt in the process. And so they recoil at the idea of going to church or reading the Bible or helping their neighbor. They just want to be individualistic, to be completely cut off because that's what's safest for them.
I think that this is the problem, because the absurdity of the world is so prevalent in the
Right.
church and in institutions. And so what happens is you become vulnerable. You decide, Lord, I need healing. My life's a mess and I just want some wholeness. What do
Yeah.
I do? And you think, oh, well, God says, get up today and go to church. Go and worship with people. And then the first thing you do is you bump into the absurdity in the church of people that are arguing, or somebody who comes up to you and says, I cannot believe the debate we're having over carpeting or over that stained glass window over there, or some decision that's being, and you're walking in going, I'm just here to worship God. I'm just here
Yeah.
to come and try and pray and be grounded in Jesus. And so this is where the absurdity sometimes gets in the way, even at the
Can I
level of
can I
church.
show you something absurd to make us a little happier? This is a
Yeah.
Christmas gift I got, and it is a map of Middle Earth. Wait, there we are. But it's the
You
evil side
love
of the
your
map.
Lord of the Rings.
Look at that. There you go. That's absurd. See, that is crazy. But it brings me happiness. So can absurdity bring you
And,
happiness? Maybe, yeah.
sometimes I think maybe that's the thing. The absurd things that point us towards God,
Mm,
I think maybe we need to embrace more of them, laughter and funny things and things that are a little bit countercultural. Because
mm.
I do think healing can be found there. And so I made a little list on my sheet today that practices that can actually help in dealing with the absurdity of the world. And these are things that I've exercised for 25 years in my hospital work. Listening deeply is a good thing to do. Naming reality. And I think it's super important that we always name reality, that we don't embrace the unreality of the world. I think confession and forgiveness are vital in healing and wholeness, that we need to embody compassion. This is something you've talked about, that we don't become so disconnected from the world that we stop embodying compassion, which means caring for our neighbor. I think that our imagination can be healed, our ability to think about Middle Earth, and by story, beauty, and hope.
Yeah.
And I think that's kind of where I would go with this, but I'll ask you that question. What does a healed imagination look like in your life? If I were to say, what do we need
Oh,
to do to heal your imagination? We live in a world where people are afraid to dream sometimes.
dreaming's scary, isn't it? Because dreams
Yeah.
are far more likely to turn into nightmares than stay pure, innocent dreams where you feel good when you wake up. Um, it's a really hard one. I'm not really sure. I'm not really sure what that looks like. I mean, uh, for me, like I said, it's a daily thing.
I think
Trying
about
my
C.S.
best.
Lewis, and I think
Yeah,
about
yeah,
Tolkien and Charles Dodson, and these authors that not that long ago, in the greater sense of history,
yeah,
were dreamers. They had imaginations and they wrote stories, and they created stories that pointed to other more deep truths. And I
yeah.
think today, who are the dreamers today? Who will write the fairy tales now for children tomorrow to read? And what will those stories look like? And how will they help point us to
Well,
healthier and happier places, rather than being a retelling of the woe of today?
when you say that, there's the who's going to write our fairy tales, who's going to produce the media that's going to leave an imprint on a generation and generations to come. Then there's the who's going to stand up and point people to the ultimate life-changing, life-transforming thing. And as Christians, I think I can guess where we would go with that.
Sure.
Non-Christians would go in another direction. But so they're very different things. There's the kind of secular, artistic, who's going to do that? And then there's this bigger question that I'm not sure I can answer. Who's going to change the world? And
but the world's busy shaping culture.
Right.
While culture is busy shaping the world, and this cycle's going round and around, and then somebody steps in and prays for healing. And I believe, and again, this is my theology, and I think it's at the heart of Acorn Christian Healing Foundation, that this wonderful organization that's existed for over 40 years.
Yeah.
The organization has been about interrupting the loop, where you actually dare to step into that and say, stop just a minute. We're going to pray for healing. And it may not, again, if we're looking at it as a linear thing, you would say that would just be breaking something and healing. But I would say if you see things as a circle going around, that healing prayer may take you to a new level where you rise up higher. And you rise up even higher, that the healing prayer allows the absurdity to be transformed into growth, and growth into new culture and new absurdity. And so I think maybe that's, 2 Corinthians 4, I made a note here. We are hard pressed on every side, but we're not crushed, perplexed, but not in despair, persecuted, but not abandoned, struck down but not destroyed. So I think healing prayer can actually serve as a transformative thing in a world that is kind of nuts and desperately needs us to find a new way to be regrounded every day. What do you think?
It's crazy, isn't it? Where does that start? What happens? What happens if we break the cycle? Where do we go? Or are we just gonna free fall? Or, like you said, are we going to rise? Or there's lots of questions to ask, because honestly, the idea of breaking the cycle that we're so used to is kind of scary.
It is. How about I finish with this? I want to finish with an absurd thing, because sometimes I find absurd, random facts and figures and bits of trivia. And I thought, okay, well, I'll finish the coffee pod today with something absurd. I bet nobody knows who Grace Hopper was. So Grace Hopper in 1947 was at Harvard, and they were working on something called the Mark II computer, and it kept messing up. It kept failing. And so they finally shut it down. And she opened this gigantic computer, which it probably only had a few kilobytes of operating memory. She opened it and found in the computer a moth that was jammed in the computer inner workings in a relay switch. They actually taped it to a logbook that they were keeping because they were inventing the computer operation. And they actually entered in a notation that they had debugged the computer. Forever and ever, this absurd notion of debugging a computer is still standard programmer slang that we use today when we talk about debugging a system. And it actually came from the literal demothing of a computer in Harvard in 1947. How crazy, absurd, and how wonderful it is to know where things come from. But then you start thinking, what will be next? Where are we going? And how exciting it can be, rather than oppressive and worry producing and anxiety producing. We can actually start celebrating the goodness of the world, and we can go walk in the park and look for exciting new things and new plants and new flowers. It's almost spring, for goodness sake.
We can transform absurdity by knowing what is absurd.
Fantastic. Well, off to have a quest this afternoon to find something absurd. I look forward to seeing you in France in the next week or so. I'm going to come and hang out with you, and maybe you can introduce me to this fish.
Yeah.
Woohoo! All right. Until next time, folks. If this has been Coffee Pods, and it's great to have you here, take care, like, follow, and subscribe.